Okay, Jim Ryan, veteran of World War II, Army Air Corps, or Army Air Force. Am I correct? Why don't you just go ahead and start with your life and then move me into the military and talk to me in your own words.
Well, I was,
Look at me.
I was born in a little town back in Virginia, Western Virginia. It's called Pardee, Virginia. And people think it's way in the middle of Virginia, but it's really on the Kentucky border. And Dad was a coal miner. And when I was 8 years old, my father had died. And so my mother figured she'd get away from her family, which we were all hillbillies. And so we got in a moose lodge, and Dad was a member of the Moose. So we were sent to Mooseheart, Illinois. And from 8-year-old, when I was 8 years old, I stayed there 4 years in Mooseheart with Mother. And we moved north to Batavia, Illinois, which is just a mile of the Mooseheart. And from there on, I finished my high school education. Then I went to the University of Illinois for 2 years. So in 1936, I had a friend who was going to Purdue, but he used to live close to me in Batavia. And he decided to go west, so I decided to go west too. So I jumped in the car with him, and off we went. And I ended up finally in Orange County. From Orange County, I learned to peck oranges. So I decided to be a fruit tramp for a while. And I had gotten me an old 24 Buick, and it made it into a camper and everything at that time. So I had a little facilities, just moved from place to place. So I packed oranges in Orange County, moved up here to Terabella, and got a job there for the winter. Packed oranges there, and then I just traveled a route for I did this for almost about 4 years. And then I realized the war was coming on at that time, so I had 2 years of college, and they were taking students, but I was almost 26 years old, so I figured I'd better get my name in. So I got my name in, and consequently, in October of 1940, I was a cadet going to pilot training at Hemet, California, where they had a little flying school called Ryan Flying School. So, so there was not too many of the schools at that time. So I got my 50 hours in there in a steerman, and I thought I was going to go on to basic, but those two of those fellows had gotten to be 26 years old at that time, so they figured we were a little too old, I guess, or something, or they didn't have the facilities. So I went on to Maxwell Field. They sent me to Maxwell Field, which was a pool for cadets in those while they got them ready to go to different schools that they opened up.
And Maxwell Field is in what state?
Maxwell Field is Alabama. And it was a real good place. We had awful good eating, but I got awful tired of eating grits, which is a favorite food of the South. But from there, I went on to Florida, where we had at Pan American Airways. They were teaching navigation at the time. They didn't have hardly any school for teaching navigation at the time. So consequently, I spent 3 months at the University of Florida, Corps of Cables. And we flew in the old 1924 Sikorsky seaplanes to get a navigation training. They took quite a bit of water at a time, but we got through 50 hours there of training. And when that was over, I with two other boys, we were sent to Alaska as cadets.
And this is 1941 by now?
This is 1941.
Before Pearl Harbor?
Before Pearl Harbor.
Okay.
And in July, we got our orders, and we went by boat from San Francisco by boat up through the inlet to Amador Field in Alaska at that time. They'd just gotten a part of the field there. At that time, the planes that we were flying and everything were B-18s. A lot of these I can't tell you. I can just tell you the numbers on them.
That's all right.
And B-18 was our main bomber at the time.
That was a two-engine or
Two engine. And we had a composite squadron, they called it. They called it the 28 Composite Squadron. It consisted of, looking on my list, I don't think we had, that I had at that time, of the personnel. We probably maybe had at the most 150 men. This is officers only. But they also included some of Fort Richardson's personnel, the Army. And at that time, you got to remember, we were the Army Air Force. And the Army still had control over us. And we had one B-10 there, and one little widget, which was a little seaplane, and one old B-10. Now the B-10 is the ones they went around, the world around flyers went around. And just bring another little point, when I was at Moose Heart, Illinois, the fellow that was in charge of Moose Heart was James J. Davis, who was Secretary of Labor. So he could get anybody he wanted to come over Moose Heart and drop something. So they all flew over Moose Heart at that time. And they had 3 flyers flew over, but later on I read only 2 really got there. So the third flyer had gotten not to Newfoundland, but they'd let him fly too, so that's the reason there was 3. And so I got into aviation early, watched that, because they had the youngest flyer that ever wanted to come there and everything, so he was able to get anybody he wanted to come. But to get back to Alaska, we had later on, we didn't get the war started until December. And before December, I was flying with B-18s and things as a navigator and as a cadet. And most all the pilots at that time, you're talking about people who were only second lieutenants. The first lieutenant was really high ranking. And a major, boy, he's in control of the whole thing, and the lieutenant colonel had charge of all the Air Force. And General Buckner, he was our head man at that time. And I used to fly with him around occasionally. He was a real nice old guy. And one time I offered him my seat, and he said, "Oh, no, son, you keep your seat. You just keep navigating." So from then on, I never said anything. I just took care of it. But one of the first things I had to do was go to Nome at that time, which was quite interesting because that's time the Russians came in and first started ferrying planes backwards and forth across the country. And at this time, I learned a lot about navigation, about winds, different things. We used to fly on an international date line. So occasionally we'd just get blown off course a little bit and land up in Russia. It wasn't our fault, but we never did have to say that we were there. So consequently, I learned a lot too there. And when the Russians came through, there were 3 that looked like big old PBYs. I got some beautiful pictures of it at the time because I had a little Kodak Bantam Special, and it was a real fine little camera. And so I managed to get a few pictures of it. And I do have those around sometime if anybody wants to see them. And we were there about a month, so we were flying every day. So I got a lot of flying time. But in those days, it was hard to get flying time in. In order to get you flying, you had to have 4 hours for the month. So we used to put all the pilots and everything, you could crab in one plane and fly up there, and everybody touch the throttle and stuff and get to 4 hours. So. But I got more hours because a lot of times I'd go with a geodetic survey at that time. Very little Alaska at that time was covered with photographs or things. And so I used to get time with it. And so then when the war started in December, when they hit the thing, the first thing the Army did to us was tell us that we were there for the duration of the war. Took our cameras, all our civilian clothes, everything we had, and sent them, including wives and anybody else, and sent it all back to the States, and that was it. So from then on, I didn't get any pictures. So from there, after that, we just tried to keep the planes flying at the time and getting new planes in. And so then about February of 1942, I got orders to go to Spokane, Washington with a bunch of the flyers with, and we picked up B-26s and brought them back to Alaska at that time. And they were really, the guys sort of called them the flying horror in that time because they did have a short wingspan, rather fast landing, took quite a bit of airway. And I would never navigate in where my position was because it was right between wings. I couldn't see a doggone thing out or anything, and I had to use a drift meter to look down. So consequently, I always rode in the nose. Well, to get in the nose, you had to get the co-pilot up out of the doggone seats, get back and then crawl down in the nose, and I could sit there and look at my charts, and I could see land, and I could navigate. Well, that's where I got some time in B-26s. Then later on, as our squadrons developed, we had 3 types of squadron. We had a fighter squadron, which was called the 18th Pursuit Squadron, and 2 light bombers, 77th, 73rd Squadron, and then 1 heavy squadron called 36th Bomber Squadron. And as we got rid of our B-18s, we got into LB-30s, which was like a 24. Didn't have superchargers, get about 20,000 feet and got stalled out there. But you could fly like mad at sea level with them. We could get 200 and some miles out of them at sea level. So, and we did get some radar equipment at that time. We had a little bit of radar equipment. But with the 24s, we had, they brought 1 B-17B down from Fort, Fairbanks, Alaska. And it was the old B type. It had no tail gunners, and it had blisters on the side. And they brought it down with them when the war started. This was after, we moved from Anchorage down to Kodiak from Helmut Fort. The 36th Bomb Squadron did, and also the 77th, which was B-26 Squadron.
Was your role to hunt for Japanese submarines and Japanese traffic?
Well, we did patrol.
They had a lot of ships, submarines around Alaska. So.
Well, they did. We did patrol, but I never did see any. I saw several submarines. I never knew if it was ours when we were patrolling at night, because you'd go over them, just zoop over them, and the time you turn around, they were down.
Yeah.
I saw a couple of them at that time, but I thought probably they were ours instead of Japanese, because we really didn't have much of an attack there. But on about June the 3rd of 1942, I was in an LB-30 with my pilot I usually flew with, and I was a navigator, and we had a radar guy at that time with us. And we got below Alaska, I'd say quite a ways. And we saw, during the night, we were out about 11 hours. And during the night, we saw flashes of light out that distance. And we thought they were, like there was in Pearl Harbor, we thought there was airplanes coming in, our ships from the United States. So that I got in about maybe about 2 o'clock, somewhere around. I went on bed for a bit, and the phone rang in the doggone squadron room. And the voice on it said, "Get your commanding officer up." And I said, "What for?" He said, "Well, you've just been hit at Dutch Harbor." So And I called the doggone thing into the doggone Navy and told them that this was there, and they told me, oh, there's some of our ships coming in, sounds like Pearl Harbor all over again. And I got the old Pappy out. I called him Pappy. We always called our pilot Pappy. Spears was his name. And he says, I'll go on back to bed, Jim. And so I went on back to bed. There was no planes for me to get into. But they sent out what planes they had there, and one of the guys I was supposed to fly as regular was a guy named Tommy Mansfield, who was a West Pointer, and he was flying a B-17. So when he took off there, he picked up another navigator instead of me because I'd been out all that time. They wanted me to get some rest. And he got shot down trying to attack, I think it was a battleship by himself head on. And the funny thing about it, years and years later, I read a little article and it said one man had survived out of that. But I never could follow that up. So they picked him up and actually he survived. One time we had a B-26 at Kodiak, hit the top of the mountain. We had to take off sometime towards the mountain at Kodiak. They hit at the top of the mountain, where then a bombardier went out with a bomb sight across the outside, landed in the snow, was the only survivor. They didn't get to him for 24 hours and he was still alive. And he survived that. So we had all kinds of crazy things like that happen. Then after that it was just flying, going down the chain little by little, as we could make phase. But we took out of Kodiak, they immediately got rid of our quarters. We went down. We just lived by the plane at that time. That time I was in B-17s. So we lost a B-17 and we got a B-24. The B-24 could carry more bombs and it could go further too. So I guess it was really a good exchange. But most of the guys liked that B-17 because they didn't have so many hydraulic controls. You'd go like this, you'd go down. You know, you'd go like this, you'd go up. Instead of a little delay before this happened. And then the B-24s, you always had a little trouble transferring fuel. Sometimes you couldn't transfer the fuel when you needed it. So that was hairy.
Is that because of the cold?
No, it was because of the way they did tanks and things some ways. A lot of times you get stuck. But one time we used Bombardier's little bar across there, you know, a second lieutenant bar to make a fuse one time. I was able to transfer fuel to one of them, so we got home okay with it. But I went through about 4 crashes and got out of it. But I quit riding in the nose after the first one because I watched that old metal mat coming up there and the sparks on the ground. From then on, I always got behind the pilot when we landed.
You were in 4 crashes?
Hmm?
You were in 4 crashes?
Oh, yeah. A lot of times, wheels give away, wheels would get away, and you'd come in. One time, this is a funny episode. I had a couple of new crews that I went up with to Anchorage, and we picked up a bunch of machine guns, 50 caliber. Because the older planes, we only had those little 30s in front. We didn't have, at that time, these planes didn't have these turrets out there where you could shoot all the kind of. So we went up, pick up these calibers, and we had the commander, Erickson was our chief commander there. And we picked all these guns up, had them in the back of the B-17. We got to Cold Bay, which is the only place we could land at that time because we were still making bases down in the Aleutians. And they had all the planes landed up one way, east to west, because they only had one runway. It was east to west. And the winds came across there like mad sometime. And we had a real heavy wind. We had all our planes landed up on each side of this doggone thing. So consequently, I was standing beside, I remember I told you I wouldn't just go and land. I was standing between these 2 pilots. Well, they'd put 2 first pilots together. And so what happened, each one was slapping each other's hand.
Can I hold you right there just a second?
Just have to change tape. Sorry about the timing. Were your crashes all on landing, or
Well, most of them are landing crashes.
is that due to the weather and so forth?
Weather got us. Weather's what got us.
Okay.
Okay, well, go ahead. And we're talking about
Well,
the planes all being east-west on the...
Between two pilots.
I got there and I was standing between them, and in order to control for the wind, the wind was swinging immediately into the thing. We got it on the ground. But the wind would swing us like this when we were heading for all these planes. So the other guy rammed the throttle to it to pull it straight again. So we run out of air, finally run out of what we had and hit the sand. Luckily, we had a lot of sand. The wheels gave away and came down. We scooted along on the belly, all that. Props hit the ground, everything. It ruined the plane. We got out of there though, and the old colonel was still sleeping back on the, among all those doggone guns. So he comes out of there and he looks at two pilots and he says, "Well, you know, I'm a command pilot." And they didn't say anything. He says, "Well, boys, see you later." Walked away. They were relieved. But that crew was killed later on. They were killed later on.
What were your targets carrying all those bombs? Ships mostly, or?
No, we tried at the ships first. You want me to keep carrying on?
Yeah, tell me. I mean, your targets,
Well,
how many hours you flew and so forth.
we got out there. We took one of our ships out past Kiska. We finally found they had an enemy on Kiska Island. We finally discovered that. Once in a while, we get raided by some of their planes too. So we took out a whole flight of B-17 out one time. We got below Kiska and we found the doggone Japanese Navy out there. And we were at 30,000 feet. So you know how they say you can drop a bomb in a pickle barrel? That old expression? Well, you can't. So we drop a bomb, and I think the fellow down there would take a spyglass and look up there and then turn his ship like that, and it'd land there. And so we spent 2 hours out there and never hit one of them. Jeez. Dropped all their bombs, came back. So the next big raid we made, we decided we'd go in low level. So we went in right on the doggone water. And we had, we didn't have the newest bombs at that time. We had old World War I bombs, I think, or
Oh, really?
to what they'd made. Really, we didn't. And we went down to ground level and come right up water level and then came and dropped those bombs, and they skipped into one of the ships and went clear through the ship, came out the other side, went out of the way. Just went over, I watched it go out there and sink. Then it went off. So that didn't work either. We started real low-level bombing for a lot of things we developed up there in the Aleutians, actually. And getting back to the guns that came in with Colonel Erickson, we took those and put them on the B-17s. We had 3 and 2, and a pilot could fly them from his wheel up there with a solenoid, you know, just go like that and just take off, bang, and get 550 going at once. That kept the Japs from coming after us. With the old B-17B, I went out a couple times in it too. You had just a plane like that, because we broke the blisters out of it finally. A pilot could scoot it one way and the waist gunners could shoot down the plane for a second and scoot it back the other, shoot down. Meanwhile, I had my little 30 caliber in a hole on this side, hanging there. At first, I used to try to pull it out and put it in another hole, but at that time, a zero would be way over there and it'd be gone. So I used to leave it in my one spot, and if it come in, I'd follow them and what I could and let it go. But after we put those 50s in the planes, they didn't bother us much from the front anymore.
Why were the Japanese interested in that part of the world? Was it oil, or was it, I don't think the oil had been...
Well, you know, if you...
Did they want to flank off the Russians, or did they want to...
If you read about the Battle of Midway and that deal that came on about that time, they decided they would make a feint towards the north and try to, and that's what we got mixed up in, really. That's the deal we got
so
in.
our ships couldn't go around
You know, it was on the 3rd of June of 1942. And that's why they hit us there. And of course, they had to come in the fog too. But we just sneaked a field in at Umnak. And they didn't know we had some P-40s down there at that time. And so when they got their pilots sort of got lost coming through the fog, they kept wondering where all these P-40s were coming from out of the air where there wasn't supposed to be any fields or anything. And so they shot down quite a few of their battleship planes at that time. And the first zero they ever got came out of Aleutians. They were able to salvage. Because when those guys got a line broken in his plane, had a line on ADAC, and they picked that plane up with the pilot and everything, complete. No, hardly anything on it. They were able to take it down and go all over it and use it later on to study all the for the planes there. And when we first started out the war, nobody really knew anything about warfare. We used to sit there with our little old manuals and look at them. Most people played bridge or poker to kill time. And it's hard to get you 4 hours a week in. And then when the war come on, here you're at war, all of a sudden everybody's out there was wondering, what in the hell do I do? And so consequently, we learned as we went along, so you might call it on-the-job training. That's exactly what it was. Even the commanding officer had no idea how to fight an air war or anything else. So we got a new commander in, ahead of General Butler. He came to us. He was an old balloon pilot from World War I. Great big, tall, husky-looking man, but he never did go with us much. Now, I do have one deal that I was in a documentary, and this was called A Report on Aleutians by John Huston, and he won a war after the war years later. I guess he took it and put it all together and put it in. They used to call it a propaganda film. Well, it was a sort of a propaganda film, but the action on it was actually true in it because I had the camera right on my shoulder, and it was in color. But the original one they had on the Report on Aleutians is the one I'd like to see again because we talked to in there, talked to the photographer and everything. He was a great photographer. He'd been in China when they had all the trouble in China and everything, this photographer had, and so he'd really made a name for himself. And it looks like when I'm doing my navigating, I'm chewing gum, but I'm really talking to the man over my shoulder. And the bombardier, when we made a raid on the ship and we were dropping the bombs, we did a little bit before we got there, and he said, make believe you're dropping bombs. So he takes this little mic thing here and goes like that, three things with his thumb, and so that was the way we dropped the bombs. And the northern side, you know, they weren't supposed to look at it or anything because it was so valuable for everybody.
Did you fly mostly at night or day, or did you mix it up?
24 hours times.
You guys were always...
We had one we called a milk run. One plane would take off, fly all the way to Kiska, radio it back in code, tell them it was clear or it wasn't clear. That's where I got caught on my 2 hours out and 9 hours back flight I made one time. And we got up down between cloud layers, flew there 2 hours. I asked the pilot, I said, let's go down and look at the ocean. He says, why? I said, well, if I can see the ocean, I can tell where wind's from. So we come out from under clouds, and I told the ocean, and I said, let's turn 180 degrees. He says, why? I says, well, we better be heading back home. I said, I don't know where we are. I can't see any land. And I says, we got 100 and some odd miles an hour wind. You know, these things are only flying 135 miles an hour. Cars that save gas. That's a B-17. And so he was good. He actually turned around and we started back. He flew, we got down on the water at that time because I realized the wind was too strong up where we were because we were at 20-some thousand feet at the time. Yeah. And so we got back on the water. Immediately, after we flew about a half an hour, I could see Kiska. Kiska was 500 and some miles where we took off. And we were making 15 miles an hour at the time. And we had all that distance to get back, so we got on the lee side of the highlands and managed to work our way back, thinking we'd never make it. But the wind slowly died down, and we were able to pull in on the southwestern part of the island, which had just put in a new field, and land the plane, walk away from it, come back the next day, looked at it, rivets all popped in it, the gas was all gone when there was no gas in it. How we got down, I don't know. Because that's one time that I always thought about in my trip. Have any more questions?
Yeah. How long were you in the Aleutians now?
2 years.
From 1940 to 1942?
No, I got there in 41.
Okay.
41, I left 43.
Okay.
I was in on the Battle of Attu, Battle of Attu too. I had, when they decided finally, we did a lot of have to go out, flying in weather, ordered into weather we should have never gone into. Commanders had no idea what things were, would make the orders, and you'd get in a plane and go. It's sort of like the fellow talked to you before. You know, you just followed order. Well, we didn't have people understood. Commander after commander was let go because next thing we didn't make a big bull and we lose planes. That guy wouldn't be a commanding officer anymore. It'd be another guy who absolutely knew anything about it. I show you how it is. I probably flew with, I can count up on, looking at my Form 5, at least 20 different guys I flew with in that time. And I flew with a lot on every mission they made. They got a DFC. Then I'd get another guy, fly with him. And every mission he made, he'd get DFC. He was only the pilot, was the only one that got a DFC at that time.
Flying cross. Yeah.
But at the end, that's 2 navigators and 36 bomber squadron. And one kid ranked me by 3 months. And he was a squadron navigator, but he was always flying with a group, which he should have been promoted to captain and been up there in group. But they didn't do it that way. You had a system of a pool. You had a pool of navigators, bombardiers, enlisted men. You'd go down in the pool and pick out a crew. You never flew with them before sometime or another. So here you'd have a pilot and co-pilot. You're in a different crew all the time. You never knew if the guy could fly the plane or not. And a lot of times we'd make missions. They dropped their bombs out 100 yards off the shore when you even get near the collar, because you had to learn to stick your head down and let that bombardier have it for 1 minute, and it could almost hit something. But you couldn't hear the winds and everything would carry your thing off. So,
what happened after you left 1943? The war's still going on.
Well, I got the freight of Washington. I was there for probably about half a year.
In Washington?
Yes, in Washington. And we had B-17s there.
Right.
I went back to the B-17s. We took out of Washington, went freighted to Washington, where they just established the school. The people were coming back from Europe. The 8th Air Force all ended up. Oh, a month after I got there, I was made staff navigator. And a month later, the whole 8th Air Force came back with General Armstrong, who was their general that came back with them. And they took over the field, and everybody else was. They tried to send me back, and I told them, nope, I'm not entitled to a year back in the States before I have to go back. So I never did go back on that at that time. I stayed 2 years at Ardmore. And during that time, we had a lot of pilots that had come back, and people with silver stars, and it really had been in some combat when you have 1,000 planes and everything, 25 missions in the old days. And we trained crews, and we sent them over there. We sent them back to Europe. And luckily, they never did put me back on one, because I got in test flight unit, and I would fly in the planes and check the navigation equipment, all that kind of stuff, kept charts on all the compasses and everything, just to see what was going on. And when I left, I threw them all away because nobody was ever interested, and everybody even looked at them or anything.
Now, did you finish your time in the service there in Washington?
No, I didn't. And what I did, 2 years at Ardmore, Oklahoma. During that period, a lot of the fellows
Oklahoma, yeah.
a lot of them sort of disappeared at times, and I often wondered whatever happened to them. But I ran into a lot of our own men up there. We probably had about 20 men out of the Aleutians that were there at the same time as I was. And one of the navigators I was with was a fellow named Hernan, was on the Doolittle raid. And he's still alive, because recently I saw a thing showing where they turned their gobble, and here's old Hernan there. And there's only about 3 or 4 of them left out of the group, and old Hernan is still one, which I'm glad to hear. And I left there and went to 29s.
29 Palms?
No, into 29 bombers, B-29s. And I went to Georgia, trying to remember the field. But I was there only about half a year, and I went to Florida. And I got in on the Bikini bomb test at that time. Because I was there in C-54s and 29s, and they established sort of a transport squadron. I have pictures of all those fellows too, by the way. In fact, I got the original thing of the whole group, and I've often wondered about what to do with the darn thing. And I went to Roswell Air Force Base, 509th.
In New Mexico?
When I walked on that base, I thought I was at home, because I saw all these guys I knew at Ardmore who disappeared at the time. And I got put in a P-29. The pilot I had was a guy named, well, I don't know why, I can't think of his name. But he dropped a second bomb on here.
On Nagasaki?
It was Boxcar Willie, or whatever he called his plane. I flew with him for a while there. And at that time, we were trying to train crews to drop the bombs, the A-bomb on Bikini. And so I flew with them a few times over Albuquerque, and I'd never seen this doggone bomb or anything. But I couldn't get out of the darn plane. I had to sit there while all this stuff was covered up with bait. You couldn't see a darn thing. Then you'd get off and fly and come back and bring it back and drop it down. But it probably was an imitation one, but they didn't want you to know what it looked like. And we carried congressmen, everybody else in the C-54s. We were there. It was almost a year project. This only lasted about a year. But when I got over there, we got to fly a lot, because we go over in and we talk. And they had drones at that time, B-17s, you could fly from a distant plane. They probably had a television camera or something, servo controls. I don't know. They never let me get in and take a look. So when the A-bomb went off and that dropped, they flew these planes through the dust. Actually, I got a letter I mailed to my brother one time. I put in, squadrons were allowed to put one mail thing in. I went to dropped the bomb over an A-bomb, and you could send it to somebody and you get it back. So when I got it back, it was probably all tore to pieces. I sent it to my brother and all thing. So there's not much left of it, but I still have it. And we take that material back and take it back to Los Alamos and different pieces of scientists. And then they had a big old pool drawing there one day to see who gets to go to watch the underground test. And our crew won it. And so we got on the old plane and went over. It was a Mars. I'd never been on a Mars before. That's a pretty good sized seaplane. But we flew over to Bikini on that. And we got there and they put us on the Admiral's ship, which is a ship that was carrying the bombs in the first place. And all these scientists were on this plane. All the famous scientists were there at that test. So the time they let the bomb go off, we went out about 7 miles from the lagoon. And next morning I thought, and I was sitting there and waiting for that bomb with a pair of dark glasses on, you know, and we had to turn around and close our eyes and all this kind of stuff. And I thought, God, I wouldn't give my place for $1,000. I got to see this thing go off. So when it's the big old flashlight, you could feel it in your eyes. And I turned around immediately and looked, and God, that damn ocean looked like it came up for a mile wide and everything. You could see the planes way up in the middle of it, way off out of the ground and everything, ships and everything. And we sat out there while they sank. The different ones sank that did sink. But after that happened, we left there. We went back to the States and probably ended our time. But when I was there, they'd give us a trip. Actually, the A-bomb dropped off from the sky. They took us out in a boat and took us all these ships that were thing. You know, some of those big old guns that just dropped like that from the heat of it. But underneath them, the paint was still there. So it happened, you know, the heat and everything so quick. We saw the different Japanese ships, went through them. Look, they had animals that had been put on them too, and different experiments. So it was quite an interesting deal. Then on my last trip back from the Bikini bomb test, this is a deal you never heard of much of thing. It was sort of a secret mission. And we brought 2 drones back, and we loaded them with sand bombs. This is probably about July of 1946, somewhere in that vicinity. I can't tell you what date it was. And we took off from Hilo, the big island, Hawaii. I in a squadron. I wasn't with the squadron commander. He was with one of the other B-17s. We had 2 B-17s and 2 C-4s and 2 drones. So you notice this latest ship they got, which are really drones? Yeah. Well, I saw a little article somewhere. It says this one guy says, well, we used to call them drones. Well, these 2 B-17s were actually drones. We got them all the way back, came over to the Santa Barbara Islands and dropped the sand bombs on them. And we bombed the coast of the United States with sand bombs. Went on and landed at Edwards, where the old hangars. There was only 2 hangars when I got there. And I stayed there until, well, I beat the other guy in about 15 minutes. He was one of these guys, his name was Payne Jennings. He was head of our squadron, giving me the lowest rating I ever had as a navigator. I asked him why, and he says, I don't know you. I said, for God's sakes, I says, you're supposed to say, I don't know anything about that. You don't give a rating. But he was a lieutenant colonel. And his name was Payne, P-Y, you know. I don't know. I think later he went down in the Bermuda Triangle with his crew. But he had to do everything in a plane. He was actually a second in command of the base at Roswell. When old Butch Blanchard used to take off, he would make us all stay on a post. This was after war, and not do formations and stuff. He was a pain, all right. So that's the last part that was any interest.
You were discharged out of
I was discharged out of
Roswell, or?
Roswell.
Okay. All right.
The last part of November 19, terminal leave took me over almost into 47.
Oh, you were in 6, 7 years?
I was 6 years and some.
Can maybe sit up here?
I'm sorry.
One of our lights there.
I got the leans. But a lot of humorous things happened to me in the service. It was really... So,
Well, to survive 4 plane crashes is pretty significant.
well, they were common, really. They were common.
Well, you know, I knew a guy that retired from this office, and he was in the Army Air Corps, and he never went overseas, and he was in 6 plane crashes.
Could be.
None of them were his fault. But when he retired, they said he was the best ally the Japanese ever had.
I didn't fly for years because of my experiments, in planes. When they train crews to come up. When those crews drive to Alaska, they took them, broke them up. I was telling you about the 2 I flew back with the colonel and the guns. They went out the next day, and they didn't evidently have a good navigator, or something happened. I think they got in the fog, got flying too close. Of course, I talked to one of the enlisted men one time. He was telling me about he flying with one named Brownie we had. And he said he looked at the back of the tail where he was a tail gunner. And he said if I had a long fishing pole, I could have touched the doggone nose of the other plane. And he said, so I got out of there, and he went up and looked out and passed the pilot. And he says, I could see the guy in the next plane, which was closest. And they hit the fog right then, and one guy said, pull right, and I'll pull left. And he said they never saw that other plane from that time on. And that was Will C. And that was the 2 guys I might have been with.
Wow. Okay.
I took Joey Brown down one time, gabbed with him a long time on the deal. And then we took, one funny part is when I was on one, I got up early in the morning to go on one raid. So I was standing there on Numnack, which is the first field we had. And we had these latrines, which consisted of a pipe with a funnel on it. Right. That was our latrine. And a big old ditch dug if you wanted to do the other. And I was standing there, in that little thing, and I looked over, I heard this Jeep go by, I looked over, and it turned out to be Francis Langford, Bob Hope, and Jerry Colonna. So when I got back from that deal, I said, how did the show go? He said, oh, it was all right. All the guys had to go to the show. Bob Hope always had an audience because they demanded that you go to these shows. You couldn't stay away from them. So he always had a captive audience. No matter, he always had a good showed up.
Hard to argue.
But that's the first female I'd seen in months because we didn't have any females down there in the islands.
Hard to argue what he tried to do, though. Okay. We appreciate this. Thank you. Kevin, go ahead and cut it. Thank you.
But I did tell you it was on the job training.
Yeah.
Well, when I went back to Tucson there last 2 years ago, and we had this little one done. I was only a few seconds. I got a film on it too, and they give me about the deal. And the other one had Pappy Boynton, not Boynton on it, but we had a Boynton in our outfit. And he's telling me the same thing I did. He's saying, we didn't know how to do. We didn't know what to do. We were just second lieutenants. We didn't even know how to fly the plane. We did this is what I'm talking like. They kept him on.